Where do you see we are as a country, as organizations in terms of being cyber ready so that we don't have to deal with a future
Right.
catastrophe?
We are not ready as a country. I spend a chapter in Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. The chapter is titled Destruction.
Yeah.
And it begins with me purchasing 25 solar panels for my roof and a big battery backup system. Not because I get good solar here, and not specifically because I want to help the environment, and not specifically because I want to save money, but mostly because I'm afraid that in the next number of years, there will be a critical attack on the United States that will target our lights and power, and I want to have power. Just right there. I think I've done the analysis and I've done a lot of research, and I spent a good number of pages in the book talking about how our critical infrastructure is under threat. And not just lights and power, our water systems, our wastewater systems. People forget that it's one thing to have water come from the tap. It's another thing when the water won't go away, when you need it to go away, right? People can get very sick. Telecommunications have been under attack, and so many other verticals that are finances, healthcare, that are critical to making us safe, happy, and successful. It's a sobering reminder to everybody that we need to do better, and actually a message to all of my government agency readers, and everybody in the government picks up my book, please do better. I'm here to help, and we're all here to help in cybersecurity because this is crucial to the nation, to the future of the nation. That's at the broad scale, right? The macro scale. Now, in the micro scale, we all play a part in cybersecurity, you and me and every single person, because cyber threats come after all of us as individuals.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast series with Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is the author of the book Cybersecurity Readiness, a holistic and high-performance approach, a Sage publication. He has been studying cybersecurity for over a decade, authored and edited scholarly papers, delivered talks, conducted webinars and workshops, consulted with companies, and served on a cybersecurity SWAT team with chief information security officers. His work on proactive cybersecurity has been featured on USA Today. Dr. Chatterjee has been a tenured professor at the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. As a Duke University visiting scholar, Dr. Chatterjee teaches in the cybersecurity programs at the Pratt School of Engineering.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chatterjee. Today, I'm especially excited because it's not often that I get as a guest the star of a Hollywood thriller. More than that, his life, which was basically enacted in the movie, is straight out of the storybooks. He was an undercover agent for the FBI, and he helped capture supposedly the most wanted spy, Robert Hanssen.
I want to see what you got on this guy.
Come again.
His internet postings, the emails, your case.
Why?
Because I don't think you have one.
He's a traitor, Eric. Started spying for the Russians, we think, in 1985. He's given them military secrets, intelligence secrets. He gave them our continuity of government program, which told them where the president would be taken during a nuclear or terrorist attack, and the vice president, and the Congress, and the cabinet.
So it's going to be a fascinating episode. We will slowly unpack the details and make the connection to cybersecurity governance, cybersecurity readiness. So I'm really excited to welcome Eric O'Neill, who isn't just any security expert. He's a former FBI undercover operative who helped capture Robert Hanssen, one of the most damaging spies in US history. His story inspired the Hollywood thriller Breach, and his new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, explores how the skills of a spy hunter translate to today's digital battlefield. Eric, welcome.
Dave, it's good to be here, especially on a day when we honor our veterans. Going into the FBI was my way of serving, but I have a large extended family of people who served in the Army and the Navy, mostly the Navy. And so I'm honoring them today, and it's good to be here speaking with you.
Fantastic. And I echo the same sentiment. Thank you for your service. And thanks to the service of all the veterans who have done so much for this country. which I have made my home for the last 34 years.
Well, we're glad to have you.
So, Eric, your story of becoming an undercover agent. As we watched the movie, we learned that your goal was to become an agent.
Right.
So why was that an interest?
Well, I joined the FBI to serve my country, to do something incredibly unique and to learn skills that I knew I would never learn anywhere else. I was a little lost after graduating college, and I was looking for something that would set me on a very important and distinguished career path. And for me, that was the FBI. And anyone thinking of the FBI, if you can get in, it is an amazing place to go. When I applied to the FBI, I was only 21 years old, which was too young to serve as a special agent. But the FBI liked my application enough that they asked me to do something that then was top secret. There was an undercover group of specialists, investigators, who were law enforcement officers. I had a badge and credentials. The only thing I didn't do was make arrests. And what we did is we investigated terrorists and spies all over the United States. So my dedicated training was a focus in counterintelligence, which is the science of catching spies, and counterterrorism, which is basically the same thing, except you're focusing on terrorists. And in order to defeat your adversary, you have to know all of their techniques and tactics. So my training at the FBI Academy, and then in the field, in real life training situations, was to understand intrinsically the way that our adversaries operate so I could know how to defend them. And in my book, I explain this by saying it's kind of like someone's throwing a punch at you, right? I love kinetic examples for everything. Someone's throwing a punch at you, and you know the techniques they're using, so you recognize the punch is coming before it hits you. And then what the FBI did was taught me how to block that punch and then strike back. So that training was pretty critical, and I was an FBI ghost. That's what they called us. I was fully undercover. I never came out of cover my entire time I was in the FBI, which was grueling and exhausting. And that final case was to go undercover in the most unique case the FBI has ever run and probably will ever run, catching the most legendary spy in FBI's history in FBI headquarters. And I think that's the one and only time the FBI has ever run an operation in their own headquarters, which was a difficult endeavor, and I managed to win. So if you watch the movie Breach, that's a great story about me. If you read my first book, Gray Day, that is in one part a memoir and another part a treatise on the evolution of espionage, but you get to see how I caught Hanssen in a first-person perspective from behind my eyes. That's my story.
Amazing, absolutely amazing.
The damage he's done to the US government is in the billions. But that's just the money part. He's also given up lives. Sources we were working. In one of his drops, he identified Valery Martinov and Sergei Motorin, 2 KGB agents we turned. They were flown back to Moscow and executed. We don't have a handle yet on how many of our assets he's compromised. Maybe 50, maybe more.
So when movies are made, again, you'll pardon my ignorance here, sometimes they might be playing with the facts just to make it more interesting. How close to reality was the movie?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Breach came out in 2007, before my book. Gray Day comes out in 2019. It took me a while to come up with the book I wanted to write, which is far more than the movie covers. A Hollywood movie is a holiday movie, and it's why they say based on a true story. If they make everything true, then it's a documentary, and those don't make millions in the box office, right?
Okay.
So yes, the movie does take liberties, but the liberties, to the most part, make sense.
Okay.
That central core of the movie, myself against Hanssen, Ryan Phillippe playing me and Chris Cooper playing Hanssen,
Yeah.
2 guys in a room in FBI headquarters playing that grueling chess match, that was all completely accurate. The surrounding things, I didn't have that much connection with his extended family, right? He never shot at me in the park. That is probably the one scene in the movie that was the most manufactured, and the writers and director, Billy Ray, and I didn't want to do that scene, but it was forced on us by some producers who said, you can't have an FBI movie where the bad guy and the good guy don't get into a shootout. So we did our best to create that scene. And what that scene encapsulates is a much longer process and slower process of convincing Hanssen that this was real, that this was a real job, that we were doing real work, that nobody was trying to catch him, that he wasn't under investigation. So he would make that final drop. And that's something I did have to do, just not in a 5-minute scene where he shoots at me in the woods.
You know, as I mentioned to you before we went live here for the recording, my wife and I watched the movie this past weekend, and we found it absolutely thrilling, gripping, and we had so many questions, and she would not believe that I'm talking to you. So I told her, I said, you want to come and say hello? She says, no, I don't want to disturb you. I said, okay. But look, another question that comes to mind, how old were you when you were engaged in that job?
Right. I had just 27 years old by the time it was done.
You showed remarkable confidence, self-confidence, belief, maturity. How did you get that?
I had to learn quickly on the job. Now, the good news is that I did grow up with great parents. And, my mother was a nurse and she worked in the ER in the burn ward. So she certainly had to have that ability to remain calm in the face of really disturbing things. It was a children's burn ward. My father was a Navy submariner and then a Yale-trained attorney. So he certainly was cool under pressure. And so I learned that from my parents, that ability to stand strong in the face of an enormous amount of stress. And fortunately for me, I learned that early because I have not lived a mostly peaceful life. I tend to throw myself into stressful situations, and maybe that's part and parcel of growing up that way. That said, part of it is the training. When you work undercover, you have to be cool, calm, and collected all the time. You never know when you're going to turn around and there's your target standing there because they're using some counter surveillance tactics, like making a U-turn or stopping abruptly after they turn a corner. And you learn this presence of mind to just keep your face completely neutral and walk by like you don't even notice them, like we would with most people, right? Every single human, the psychology of humanity is that we are constantly subconsciously evaluating everyone we come across under a whole number of characteristics. We are the most judgmental species on Earth. And one of those is this person a threat or not? And 99% of the time, we do this mental calculus that says this person is not a threat. We barely look at them and we walk on by. And the other person in their subconscious picks that up and realizes, okay, no threat, we're all good, right? If you suddenly show that, oh my God, there's the guy, well, now they immediately pick up on that and your investigation is over. So I created this ability to wear this mask that never really showed any emotion other than what I wanted to show.
Fabulous, fantastic. Now, you mentioned early on that you went through FBI training. My question is, to join the FBI, does it help to have military training prior to that?
It can, depending on what you want to do, particularly military. And there were some of my fellow ghosts who had come out of the military, out of law enforcement, out of police. It's a way of thinking. It's the ability to work on a team and conduct an operation with precision and professionalism, and that can certainly help. A lot of military guys who were in, for example, special forces will go into the FBI and go into the elite hostage rescue team, which are the team who will raid and save people on planes that are hijacked by terrorists. And those are the elite of the elite. But in what we did, the elite group of investigators can certainly help, but it's not 100% necessary.
Okay. And how long was the FBI training?
Can't tell you. That remains classified. So that was one of the things that I couldn't put in the book, but I am a graduate of the National Security School at the FBI Academy at Quantico, Virginia. And then the training continues well into your first year on the street, except for you train against actual intelligence officers and hopefully don't screw up because it can create a lot of derision from and laughter and joking around from all of your colleagues.
Fabulous. So you didn't expect to be placed on or to be assigned to that mission, correct?
No, I certainly did not expect that I was going to be woken up early on a Sunday morning, which did happen, and met outside my apartment by my supervisory special agent, a wonderful guy named Gene McClellan. We're still very good friends. And to get asked to work on what turned into the most important case that the FBI had ever run, in the strangest place the FBI had ever run an undercover investigation.
Wow. Then you have this remarkable success in helping capture this person. The movie kind of ends where your boss said that you have the job of becoming a special agent, but you decided to walk away from it.
So Kate is real. She was the special agent assigned to make sure I didn't screw up.
Okay.
That was her job.
Okay.
And she was phenomenal. The real Kate became like a big sister.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I think she called me little brother throughout the case, and was not only a mentor, a decorated, long-standing counterintelligence agent who had caught spies for years. And
Wow.
so she was, if it were the CIA, she would be my handler, right? The person on the outside who's giving my instructions, who's receiving my feedback, who's getting my daily logs, who's telling me my mission for the day that the analysts really wanted me to try to perform. And a lot of my success was her mentorship and leadership and learning on the job, as well as learning from Hanssen.
You know, she looked really stern. She knew what she was doing. She would be a handful of a boss if you were slacking up. So that was...
Certainly. But she understood me very well.
Uh-huh.
And instead of saying, you screwed up, this is what you need to do, she would speak almost in parables, you know, explaining things through, this is how it's worked in the past, and this is how you could do it, which worked very well for me and kept me focused. It kept me goal-oriented, as opposed to sometimes when you over-criticize somebody, you can get their back up and make them obstinate and not want to perform. And so she was masterful at that, and it was very much appreciated.
That's fantastic. And I must also say that whoever played the part of Robert Hanssen, that look and that wry smile would send chills through my bones, you know?
That's Chris Cooper, you know, Academy Award-winning actor. He should have gotten nominated for Academy Award for that movie. And he spent a lot of time with me in Toronto asking me, how does Hanssen walk? How does he talk? How did he look at you? What was it like? And built that character. And then Chris Cooper is so wonderful, but on set, he is a character actor. So once he started filming, he stayed in character as Robert Hanssen the entire time until they wrapped. So when you came up and talked to him, you would be talking to Robert Hanssen, and which was freaky. It was not fun. I felt bad for his family. And, you know, once we wrapped, then he was done. He turned back into Chris Cooper. He's just such a wonderful, warm person. So it's...
So you mean to say, even when he was not shooting,
yes,
he was still in character until...
Yeah, if you walk up to the crafts table where all the food is and you're grabbing a snack and you look over and there's Chris waiting for his next scene and you asked him a question, he would answer as Robert Hanssen.
And you have answered this question, but let me ask you again. Is that how Robert Hanssen was?
Oh, yes, he was certainly like that. He was a difficult boss, and such a difficult boss that the FBI didn't know what to do with him. He was a decorated special agent, supervisory special agent, whose career had stalled because he just was not good at managing people. And at the time that we learned from a former KGB source that Robert Hanssen was quite possibly the legendary spy that everyone had been after for 2 decades, more than 2 decades, called Gray Suit. He had already been banished to the State Department to just ride out his service until he retired, which was going to happen in a few months. So we only had months to catch him. And that's why the FBI took a very extraordinary chance on creating this last-minute new role at headquarters.
Absolutely. And the question that lingers in my mind, it's beyond the scope of our discussion, but I'll just mention it anyways. I don't believe I got the answer at the end of the movie, and that is what motivated Hanssen to do what he did, given his very decorated and accomplished career.
Yeah,
and
I'm going to give you the very short answer.
Short answer, yeah.
We've been in Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. We've been on Spies for quite some time. Hanssen was motivated in part by greed, but also because he was angry. He was mad at the FBI. The FBI didn't give him the roles he wanted.
I see.
So essentially, he was a disgruntled employee. He also needed money. He wanted to be James Bond, and it turned out that his skill was to be an amazing analyst, and he was adept at synthesizing information and finding that one nugget of truth that was critical to winning an operation. But he didn't want to be that. He wanted to be like me. He wanted to be in the field chasing spies and taking down terrorists and bad guys. He just wasn't good at it. And the FBI uses you where you are best, and that made him mad. And when you have a disgruntled employee who's also a pretty severe narcissist, then that's a big recipe for a trusted insider. And then you add the pressure situation of needing money. So Hanssen volunteered his services to the KGB originally. And they didn't even know who he was. He was never recruited. He was a volunteer.
Incredible. And especially when a man of his caliber, of his experience, should have clearly known that he was not going to get away with it.
Well, he got away with it for over 2 decades. So he was probably one of the longest lasting spies in American history. Normally, spies don't get away with it for that long. I mean, if someone has gotten away with it, we'll find them eventually, because no one really does get away with it from ever. And the reason is someone always turned you in. And here Hanssen had made a bet. Soviet Union collapsed.
Right.
He got lucky. The KGB intelligence officer who lost his job and stole a file of information didn't sell it right away. He held on to it until his retirement. And a decade later, he finally sold it. And that's led us right to Hanssen.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. And let's now talk about your current career as a cybersecurity strategist.
Certainly.
And my question to you is, what skills that you gained, if I may call that the first career, has transferred over to this second career? And maybe what are the most significant ones that transferred over?
Certainly. Well, what I have long said in my work with different cybersecurity companies, and now my own cybersecurity company, NexusShore, is that what I do is I bring counterintelligence to cybersecurity. And counterintelligence is the idea of understanding your adversary and striking first, stopping the intelligence goal before it causes untold harm. And where we've moved in cybersecurity, and I'd like to think I helped nudge a little bit over the past 2 decades, is not just worrying about defense, but actually hunting the threat. What I say in both of my books is we have to hunt the threat before the threat hunts you. That if you are just blindly waiting for the attack and thinking you're going to build a perimeter and defend against it, you've already lost, because that attack will get in. And my new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, details all of the ways that this new wave of cyber spies, and I focus mostly on cybercrime, how these criminals are not attacking our computer systems. They're not breaching our perimeter. They're attacking you and me. We are their access. We become their virtual spies, whether we know it or not. And they are getting in by fooling people. Mm-hmm. And most of these attacks don't even use a line of code. So as cybersecurity professionals, we need to think like spy hunters, right? We need to predict that the attack will land, catch it as fast as possible, and neutralize the threat before they do incredible damage.
Very fascinating and interesting. In fact, this connects with the book that I recently published, the deepfake conspiracy.
Right.
And the reason I wanted to mention it over more than putting in a plug is deepfake threat, as you know, is becoming such a problem. It's tarnishing reputations. It's causing severe financial harm. People have even committed suicide. It's causing all kinds of personal destruction as well as organizational chaos. And what I really like was the way you framed it, that these deepfake threat actors are our enemies. These are personal attacks. They're meant to get you, meant to bring you down. I can see how your skill sets would be of great value. Because when I was reflecting on your character, on your skills, and whatever I had read, and I said, oh, you would be amazing to uncover insider threats. As you know, insider threats have been a source of cyber attacks for a long time. They continue to be a major source of compromising systems and networks. But I think your ability goes beyond insider threats, correct?
Yes, certainly. So insider threats are always going to be a problem. You will always have that disgruntled person or that person that's bribed, or that person that is blackmailed, or that person that is fed by a different ideology than your organization or your government agency. And there will always be those spies. And those are our traditional spies, right? Someone who is already inside the circle of trust, who has access. And then you have what I call your virtual trusted insiders. And most cyber attacks happen because of these. These are unwitting pawns. These are people who have done nothing wrong except maybe got fooled or tricked using very elaborate schemes. And I open up my new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime, with the story of how I was almost compromised by this very clever cybercrime gang who used all of the psychology of breaches, right? Urgency, emotion, a benefit. I thought I was going to be speaking at this incredible speaking event in Cape Town, South Africa, at this 10,000 seat church, and turned out that the entire thing was a scam. And fortunately, I caught the scam before I sent them all my money. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, because I'm trained to spot this. And I do spend an enormous amount of time in my book on AI and the way that it's not only changed us as a society, has changed our children, but is leading to these deepfake attacks. And your book's great too, because it's important for us to be able to recognize how AI is being used by our adversaries to make us trust something we know in our heart of hearts is too good to be true. So the difference between a trusted insider who's a human sitting in cubicle 3B, right, and already in the circle of trust, and an external threat actor who uses a identity of one of your employees, a username and password, and he gets in and starts creating mayhem, using them as a puppet or a pawn, is really no different, because both have access, both are able to steal and exfiltrate information, and both are going to cause significant damage. And the cool thing is, catching them, it uses the same technology and tactics. You have to have a cybersecurity infrastructure that understands your data, and what we like to say is intrinsically. That's your word. You have to have intrinsic knowledge of your data and context into what is happening in your data. So whether it's someone internal, right, who's accessing things they shouldn't and downloading it, because you have to exfiltrate it somehow, right? Or someone who has attacked from the outside and is doing the same thing, you have to be able to see that that's happening. Know what looks good and what's normal, and then see that something is going wrong. And if you have robust cybersecurity and the technology and tools are out there to do it, then you have that early warning system that you have a spy, that the cyber criminal has breached, that an espionage attack is happening, that you have a trusted insider, and you can take immediate steps to prevent it from becoming a serious problem.
Fantastic. So we learn about these attacks being caused by nation-state actors, right, in other parts of the world. And it's very hard to get hold of them, because despite all the coordination among law enforcement professionals, what I've found through my research and work is enforcing the law in some countries is more difficult than others.
Right.
So when external actors in the form of nation-state actors get involved and are trying to infiltrate a corporate network or a government agency's network, even that, you think you can proactively detect if you have a very sophisticated cybersecurity infrastructure?
Certainly, because there's no difference. And this is another statement I make and I prove in my new book, right? There's no difference between how a spy and a cyber criminal infiltrate and exfiltrate information, right? So the only difference between the two really is the outcome. They're using the same tactics.
I see.
Reconnaissance, they learn all about you. They find your pressure point and your weaknesses, right? They find that space that they can attack. If we want to use a kinetic example, you've built a fortress, right, around your data, around your company, and they find the way to sneak in. Maybe they're pretending that they're a vegetable vendor and they're getting in past the guards, or they're mining under the walls, or they're climbing over them, but they're finding a weak point and a way to get in. And once they're in, they're doing the same tactics.
Mm-hmm.
They're quietly expanding their reach and presence, and they're stealing information. They exfiltrate information. They have to get the information out. So when they get in, you
Mm-hmm.
have a way to see them. How they got in, that's a way to see
Mm-hmm.
that you've been breached. And when the information starts to leave, there's another clue that you've been breached. And like I said, the only difference is the outcome. Because what a spy will do is quietly steal information, and then they want to disappear. They want to sneak out the same way they got in, like a ninja, right? They never want you to know they were there. Because they've stolen the information, and now they want to use that information. If you know they've stolen the information is not as useful. A criminal does all the same stuff and then smashes and grabs and burns everything on the way out, right? So that they can use these double extortion attacks and sometimes triple. They've stolen your information and they've locked it all with ransomware and encrypted it. So you have to pay them for the key to get your information back. Or if you say, go to hell, I've got a backup, right? I'm just going to restore from that. They say, well, we've also stolen all your information. So if you don't want us to create all sorts of mayhem with it, you still have to pay. And that can create that urgency and pressure. And that's the hallmarks of cybercrime are urgency and pressure, because they don't get paid unless they win. That's the thing. That's the big difference between a spy and a cyber criminal. Spies get a salary. They get paid, right? Now, maybe they didn't get you this time. They'll get you next time. They'll get someone else. But criminals only get paid if they're successful. If they can't get you to pay the ransom, then they've spent all that time and effort for nothing. So they want to create the most pain and the biggest sense of urgency possible to get you to pay.
So my research over the years, last close to 2 decades now, finds that organizations are at different states of readiness, proactive readiness, let's put it that way. For the most part, I would say maybe they fall a little short of moderately ready.
Right. I'd agree.
I have a framework that I use. It's also a scoring methodology. I use the words commitment, preparedness, and discipline. And each of those anchors are associated with several success factors, which came out of research. So I provide my clients with a questionnaire that they complete. It's a self-assessment. So I provide them with the scoring method. So they themselves can see how they have scored and what does that mean in terms of how ready they are. And so this way they become more aware of their vulnerabilities, their weaknesses, and then we move on to the next step of how do we address their security challenges. So I've been doing this for a long time. One of the things that I have found is the leadership mindset is often very reactive. They want to treat security, yes, it is important, but it shouldn't come in the way of our mission, which is to produce this product or to design this product better. This is a bigger problem for smaller organizations with less resources, where the CEO is having to do a lot of things to keep the company afloat. And security is one more thing that he or she has to handle, which they rather not, and they rather outsource or give it to somebody else.
Right.
So I run into this a lot. For organizations, readiness is crucial, but they often don't see the strategic value of cybersecurity effectiveness. Given your experience, where do you see we are as a country, as organizations, in terms of being cyber ready so that we don't have to deal with a future catastrophe?
There's a lot there. So let me see if I can kind of like pull it all together and unpack some of this. Starting from the end, we are not ready as a country. I spend a chapter in Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. The chapter is titled Destruction. Yeah. And it begins with me purchasing 25 solar panels for my roof and a big battery backup system. Not because I get good solar here, and not specifically because I want to help the environment, and not specifically because I want to save money, but mostly because I'm afraid that in the next number of years, there will be a critical attack on the United States that will target our lights and power, and I want to have power, right? Mm-hmm. So just right there, I think I've done the analysis, and I've done a lot of research, and I spend a good number of pages in the book talking about how our critical infrastructure is under threat, and not just lights and power, our water systems, our wastewater systems. People forget that it's one thing to have water come from the tap. It's another thing when the water won't go away, when you need it to go away, right? People can get very sick. Telecommunications have been under attack, and so many other verticals that are finances, right? Healthcare, that are critical to making us safe, happy, and successful. And it's a sobering reminder to everybody that we need to do better. And actually a message to all of my government agency readers, and everybody in the government picks up my book, that please do better. And I'm here to help. And we're all here to help in cybersecurity, because this is crucial to the nation, right? To the future of the nation. That's at the broad scale, right? The macro scale. Now in the micro scale, we all play a part in cybersecurity, you and me and every single person. Because cyber threats come after all of us as individuals, but you can take that and use the same tactics and techniques that attackers are using against you and me, and they're using those to breach companies. So the book, it balances this really nicely. I didn't know if this Frankenstein monster would work, but it worked perfectly. It can be read by an individual, a grandparent who wants to, how do I protect myself, or a CISO. And all of the skills you need and plans and methodologies are there. So my methodology is called PAID: prepare, assess, investigate, and decide.
Okay.
And that one point you made about this decision to invest, this decision to act, that's critical. It comes at the end of PAID because you need to prepare, you have to constantly assess, you have to investigate when you see the attack. But decide means you don't put your head in the sand, that you decide to act now, that you decide to stand up and enlist and join the cyber war that we're fighting right now against cybercrime, which is the fastest growing business on earth. Just the cost of cybercrime flowing through the dark web has surpassed $14 trillion. If that was a country, it would be the third largest economy on earth. And cyber espionage. There are countless countries out there and foreign threat actors who want to do us harm.
Yep.
And, protecting your organization, protecting yourself is one way that you can help make us safer from cyber attacks. Because every one of us that falls means that they win. So there are a few things that are real critical in doing this. And of course, one of them is understanding all the ways that cyber criminals and spies are attacking, and then knowing the ways to defend against them. And that's the whole point of the book. It was all of this thought leadership that I've been doing. Now, final thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is there are organizations who just can't afford a chief information security officer, right? That is an executive level. And their salaries, if you want a good one, are around $300,000. I know that because we've just done research, because one of the things that my new company, NexusShore, does is provide a vCISO, right? A virtual CISO. So you can rent one of our incredible people. And we scooped up all the best people who had just left the whole VMware, Carbon Black, Broadcom thing. And so we have them all ready to go. And we start exactly the way that you described it in your book with a cybersecurity readiness assessment. Where are you in your journey? And what do you need to do? And I'll give it one more tip. One way to sell cybersecurity, if you're the IT guy that now has been like, you're now in charge of cybersecurity, go with God and do well, right? And you're like, I don't have any training for this. I know networking. Buy my book and hand it to your CEO. And after they read it, they will come to you and say, I'm giving you budget. Because it happens every time.
Right.
But the big problem is that you can't afford it. But one way to sell it, one way that I describe it is insurance. We have to have cybersecurity insurance. You have to have it. And we've worked with insurance companies who will lower the premiums, which are extraordinarily high, if you can show that you've met a standard of cybersecurity that is going to make their bet on you worth it. And we've worked with 2 clients who just the cost of getting their premiums down paid for all of the work we did.
Yeah, fantastic. In fact, I wanted to chime in on a couple of things. I couldn't agree with you more that cyber insurance is very important. In fact, even I recommend the same to my clients. And I recommend it from the standpoint that see if you can get cyber insurance, because that's going to be a test of where you are in terms of your state of cybersecurity readiness, because insurance companies expect a certain standard before they will be willing to insure you. Plus, they'll expect you to maintain that level to continue to be insured. So getting cyber insurance is, in a way, enforcing cyber discipline within an organization, which is a great thing to have.
Right.
So that's one. You said several great things. Another thing that struck home with me was, you're exactly right. The CISOs, you talked about CISOs. Hiring CISOs are expensive. And you have amazing CISOs that organizations could benefit from. My research also finds it's not just about hiring a CISO, but it's about empowering the CISO effectively so the CISO can do their job. That includes who they are reporting to, what kind of budget they have, who do they have to go to for their budget, because the extent to which you can keep the CISO function relatively unbiased, free of bureaucracy, with clear goals, adequately empowered, and preferably reporting to an executive committee outside the C-level.
Right.
That provides a better form of assessment, review, as opposed to if it is all within the organization where they will try to manipulate, twist their arms, and get a favorable report so they look good to the outsiders. You know this.
Yes.
So there are these security success factors. I told you I uncovered 17. they're also nuanced. Like if I were to, share with an organization that you must have good security awareness and training programs, what does that mean? At one level, you can have check the box approach where you hire a vendor, they provide you with a platform with tools, and you have your employees go through it once or twice a year. But a best practice is when you customize it, when you contextualize it, when you provide clarity in terms of, given the nature of your role, what are your do's and don'ts? So that's where I found significant difference between the exemplar organizations and the wannabes is the exemplars go deep into the different aspects of security governance, and they try to make sure that they are putting their best foot forward. Like a person like you, of course, I can never gauge all the skills you have acquired, but at a generic level, you are a great student of human behavior, I would like to believe. And that ability is lethal in many ways because at the end of the day, the threats are being devised in the human mind, being executed by humans with the help of technology, granted, and are being dealt with by humans. So humans continue to be the common and most important factor, both the most highly vulnerable and also the most significant from a defense standpoint. So understanding human behavior and making sure that you can position the mindset appropriately where they are motivated. You gave the example of the criminals wanting to get paid. So now the question is, what's the motivation for a person, Joe, doing a certain job in an organization that they should do their part from a security standpoint? Because Joe is not seeing the direct connection between doing whatever he does in the most secure way and his paycheck or how it could impact the company.
Right. Well, a couple things there. When we do vulnerability assessments of small and medium companies, and when we're talking about the CISO, you graduate to being able to afford a CISO who's a member of your executive team, who usually they'll begin by supporting to the CEO and have a line to the board, and you have an executive committee of the board that is reviewing the funding for cybersecurity. That's how we like to do it because now the board is engaged.
Right.
And I know that the SEC tried to do this. They postulated a rule and it got shot down, and I wish the rule had passed. But I do think that every board should have two critical members. One person who understands cybersecurity and another person who's an attorney. That's like critical for every board, right? Because now you have the two core parts of risk detection and a response on your board. That's a little bit of an aside because most small and medium, and that's where we focus with my company, aren't able to afford that CISO. And so they're looking for cybersecurity advisors to come in like us and help that person who's in charge of cybersecurity. But you can grow there. And in the very early stages, when you're doing that assessment and following up on what you said about the human element, which yes, that's where I focus and that's what I think is so critical. We find two things with every organization we look at, and we see ourselves as helping them get to that journey and growing. Because if you get hit by if a company gets hit by a cyber attack and they're small and medium, there is a very good chance they go bankrupt, or they're set back so far that they're never going to grow to enterprise. So two things, right? One, two-factor authentication. I pound that drum all the time. I know people hear it all the time, but the fact of the matter is so few companies adopt it as a practice across the board. And that is the death knell. If you are not deploying two-factor authentication and every single employee is using it and they hate it using it, but you have to train that culture to say, think of it as a game, because every time you are getting that extra code or opening your authenticator app, you are preventing an attacker from just typing in your username and password, which they've already stolen or they've bought off the dark web, and getting into your organization. The other is shadow IT. I like to call it ghost IT, and it makes my partner laugh. I just like that better, right? But the shadow IT, if you're not providing appropriate tools for your organization, they're going to go get it outside and they're going to connect it to your data. And that gives a really easy way for attackers to get in. One of the biggest things we're seeing right now is the use of AI. If you don't have an organizational plan for AI, your own gateway AI that's controlled by you and is internalized, your employees are all going to be using it outside. And now you're just handing your IP over to one of the big AI companies. And now someone else can actually, we've shown where you can use certain keywords to search for intellectual property of organizations that is now just sitting in the big AI company databases because all your employees are editing all of their confidential stuff on an AI platform because it's how everybody thinks now, because you haven't given them some internal resource. So finding all this shadow IT, and there's all sorts of other stuff that people will grab if you don't give them an efficient technology to do their job. And that's two simple, easy things that you can really quickly address and will help save you from a huge number of cyber attacks.
Thank you for those tips. Those are very useful. I want to emphasize the importance of having a legal representative involved right from the onset. And the reasoning is very simple. Ultimately, most of these cyber incidents end up in a court of law.
Yes.
So if the organization has to go there to defend themselves against, let's say, being accused of gross negligence, if they were doing things correctly from the beginning and were being guided by legal personnel, then they have a much better chance. So that's the legal side. I couldn't agree with you more about multi-factor authentication. Yes, I've done an episode or two on the fatigue that comes with following MFAs. In fact, there's an interesting little story about guess who are the biggest violators of MFAs? They are the developers, because they have to keep multiple applications open side by side so they can switch between applications. And if they have to every time enter authentication details, it's a painful process. So they don't like it themselves.
Yeah, but there are solutions. So we were working with a medical facilitator, rehabilitation offices all over the country. And we found that this was a huge problem. The nurses just didn't want to log every time they logged into the computer, on the floor to log the patient information, because they're doing it countless times a day. They didn't want to have to type in username, password, and then pick up their phone and open their authenticator app and then do that. They saw that as a stumbling block to getting their job done. And so the IT people would turn it off because the nurses were driving them crazy, right? But that is that is the single easiest point of attack when you do that. So what we did is we installed RFID badge readers. So instead of having to log in with your username and passwords are completely useless, and then have the extra step of having to use that two-factor authentication, all they have to do is pull out their RFID badge, touch it to the sensor on the computer. They're immediately logged in, right? And it saved that problem.
Exactly. In fact, I've had the pleasure of talking to many who are developers of multi-factor authentication technologies that's making them passwordless. And some really cool stuff is already out there and or coming into play. So there's help on the way. That's the good news. Well, I know that you have some interviews coming up in a few minutes, so I don't want to keep you very long. I told you we might need to do a sequel.
I'm certainly happy to do that.
But before we wrap up, Eric, I want you to give people some tips of what they can do to protect themselves from deepfake attacks.
Certainly. So very quickly, you're right. Deepfakes attacks are targeted against our elderly citizens and our youth. And part of that is because some of our elderly people, and I know some older people than me, and I'm old, right, that are incredibly adept online, but most didn't grow up with it. I mean, I'm Gen X, so I straddled that line from analog to digital. And I'll be honest with you, I actually write a newsletter every week, and it comes out Tuesday. So today it came out. And it's all about looking at the past technology. And you can read in what I'm writing, because I do it also storytelling, that I miss it. I miss the analog days. It was easier then. All this digital stuff, it just makes things harder. I'm sorry. But the fact is that if you're not really computer savvy, then you can be fooled easier. And our youth are very impressionable. And deepfakes are what they essentially do. And you can clone a voice or you can clone a face. For example, you don't really know if you're talking to me or if I'm in my pajamas and my hair's a mess and I'm just typing what I want my avatar to say, right? That's the way we're moving in society. And I think in the next few years, deepfakes will be indistinguishable from seeing a human on screen. But what the attacker wants to do is use this deepfake to gain the trust of somebody. That's essentially what you want to do. It's espionage at its core. You're using deception to gain someone's trust and get them to do something that they know they shouldn't do.
Yep.
And often that is today, here's an example of a deepfake that is just moving like wildfire around the nation. you'll get a phone call from someone you love. Like we're moving into the holidays, and this is going to happen a lot more right now. You get a phone call from someone you love, and they say, hey, I'm on a trip. Someone robbed me. They stole my backpack. I've lost my phone and my wallet, and I'm borrowing someone's phone. You hear their voice, right? And I'm borrowing someone's phone, and I need you to wire me money so I can pay the hotel, or they're going to kick me out. And so I can buy a ticket to come home as soon as I'll pay you back, right? And there's urgency, and they sound really upset, and you're a good friend, or it's a family member. And so, you wire Western Union $2,000. That money's gone. There you go. Just gave it to a cyber criminal. And it is costing people millions of dollars every month. And they're targeting elderly people because it's grandma, grandpa, help me out, right? And it's all the same espionage act. They're doing reconnaissance. They're learning about you. They're figuring out when you're on vacation on Facebook. So you're actually on vacation. Who's your family member? Who can they target, right? And youth as well. And you mentioned some of the ways that kids are getting exploited online where they believe something that's not true. So what can you do, right? Well, first of all, when there's urgency and emotion in a communication that comes to you over the internet, don't jump right in. Take a breath and think. The criminals don't want you to think. They need that urgency to propel you toward making that decision that you know in your heart of hearts you shouldn't make, but they're forcing you into the decision before your better senses say, wait, stop. So always say, wait, stop. Okay, hold on, right? And then think about it. What I say in the book is have a code word with your friends and family. I have one with my family. So if they don't hear that code word when I call from my trip and say I've been kidnapped, right? They know it's a deepfake because I'm always going to use it. If you don't have a code word, you can say something quickly like, okay, I know that you lost. I'm sure this is a terrible situation, honey, but what was the last book I asked you to read last week before I wire this money, right? The bad guy's not going to know that. They've just cloned your voice, right? And they're typing whatever they want you to say. So these are things that you can do to resist that urgency. Do a little bit of investigation to find out if it's true and discover the deepfake from the truth.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Great tips, simple tips, hard to follow though.
Yes, they are.
I have to end this episode on a reflective note. And that is, our life, interestingly, has become so complicated. It seems like technology has made life easier, but it has become complicated where we have to provide code words to our family members so they are sure that it is us and not somebody else imitating us. But it's a reality, what Eric said. And I would strongly urge listeners to follow through. Another thing that he said in so many words, I'm going to put it a little differently. If something is too good to be true, unfortunately, it probably is. As Eric said, that anytime there is emotion involved, think and ask yourself, should I jump in or should I check? Going back to verifying everything, doing the due diligence, being your own investigator to try and protect yourself and your near and dear ones. Eric, I'd like to conclude this episode, and you will still have the last word. Thanking you for all that you do. Yours is a fascinating life, and you're still a very young man. The Breach movie was phenomenal. I'm yet to read both your books, but I will. You're a great communicator. I wish you great success in all your endeavors. And thanks for coming on my show.
Well, thank you, Dave, and especially for all you do in getting awareness out, for giving me your platform to talk a little bit about the things I'm passionate about, which are protecting you and me from cyber attacks. And all of your listeners and everyone else out there, I ask that everybody go check out my book. If you've liked my voice, I read the Audible version, so you can listen to me speak. It can help you get to sleep at night. I don't know. And everything you need is in that book to train you to think like a spy and act like a spy hunter and make yourself safe from the entire cyber attacks of today and the ones into the future.
Well, thank you so much, Eric.
The information contained in this podcast is for general guidance only. The discussants assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantee of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness. The opinions and recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the discussants and not of any organization.